There's a moment, and if you've lived it, you'll know exactly what I mean, where the people who were supposed to catch you are the ones who pushed you. Not with cruelty, not with a raised fist or a screaming match in the kitchen, just quietly, systematically, with the kind of soft, practiced indifference that only people who love you can deliver. For me, that moment came in the form of a cardboard box. A flat, unremarkable moving box my father pulled from a closet shelf, popped open without looking at me, and set on the coffee table like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like folding your daughter's shirts into a box while she stood 3 feet away wasn't a thing that needed explaining. I was 36 years old. I owned a company. I had a name on a deed nobody in that room knew about. And I watched my father pack my belongings into that box the same way he'd taught me to swing a hammer, quiet, methodical, no wasted movement. My mother sat across the room and nodded like it made perfect sense. My sister didn't even look up from her phone. What happened after that night unraveled years of silence, uncovered a forgery I never signed, and led me to stand on a porch in front of every person who had ever underestimated me, and hand my 80-year-old grandmother the one thing she had lost before I was ever born. This is that story. Stay with me, because by the end, you'll understand why I'm not angry anymore, and why I never needed to be. My name is Serena Holt. I run a company called Coastline Property Restoration out of a converted boathouse on the edge of a town called Heron Cove. We take coastal homes that the ocean has spent years trying to destroy, salt-eaten siding, rotted foundations, joists gone soft from 30 years of damp, and we bring them back, not just structurally. We bring them back to what they were supposed to be. I started the company with a borrowed truck, a second-hand nail gun, and more stubbornness than money. That's not a romantic way to describe it. It's just accurate. By the time I was 35, I had a business partner, a small crew, and a client roster I was genuinely proud of. I'd built something real, not something anyone handed me. Something I'd climbed into existence with my own 2 hands. So when my biggest client called on a Friday morning in late spring and told me his investor had walked, I didn't spiral. I sat in my office, looked at the numbers, and thought, a quarter of the year's revenue gone in a 10-minute phone call. Then I closed the laptop. I'd rebuilt houses the sea had swallowed whole. I could rebuild a quarter of a year. What bothered me more than the money was the quiet that followed. The realization that I'd have to sit with this alone, because nobody in my family had ever once asked what I actually did for a living. They thought I worked construction. Adjacent enough. I'd stopped correcting them years ago. That afternoon, I made the drive I made every Friday, 3 hours inland to Millbrook, the town where I grew up, to the house where I'd been sleeping most weekends for the past 1.5 years. My father, Gerald, had suffered a heart attack 14 months earlier. I got the call at a job site and drove without stopping. And I just didn't really leave after that. Somebody had to hold the house together while he recovered. In my family, somebody had always meant me. When I pulled into the driveway that evening, there were 2 extra cars at the curb. My cousin Marcus's truck, and the dented black sedan belonging to my sister's boyfriend, Danny. Company on a Friday in my family usually meant a decision had already been made, and I was about to hear what it was. The screen door hadn't even finished its slap behind me when my sister's voice cut across the hallway. So it's true. You got let go. Vanessa was folded into the corner of the couch with her phone tilted toward her face, Danny beside her, my mother Margaret in the armchair across from them. Our neighbor Mrs. Rowe sat by the window with a glass of sweet tea, pretending she was anywhere else. Laid off, I said. The client lost his investor. Nobody fired me. Vanessa turned to my mother like I wasn't standing in the room. Mom, who's going to cover my car payment now? Not, are you okay? Not, what happened? Just a bill, addressed to me, before I'd even put down my bag. My mother set her tea on the side table and folded her hands the way she does when she's already made up her mind and wants it to look like a conversation. Now, Serena, don't get worked up. We'll sort it out. We always do. How did you already know? I asked. Vanessa shrugged. Danny's brother works at the supply company. Word travels. They had known for hours. They'd gathered in this living room, discussed my worst Friday in years, and the only item on the agenda was who was going to cover my sister's car payment. I drove 3 hours to find out my family had held a meeting about my paycheck, and I wasn't invited. My mother smiled like I was being difficult. Sit down, honey. You're exhausted. I didn't sit. My father walked in from the hallway, carrying a flat cardboard box, the kind we kept stacked in the garage for moves. He popped it open without looking at me and set it on the coffee table with the same quiet efficiency he used for everything. Your sister and Danny need a real room, he said. They're talking about getting serious. It makes sense for them to have yours. Then my mother delivered the line she had clearly rehearsed, the one that would stick to me for months. Vanessa needs this house more than you do, Serena. She said it gently. That was the part that made it worse. Vanessa didn't look up. Mrs. Rowe discovered something fascinating in her tea glass, and my father walked down the hall to my room and began folding my shirts. I followed him. I stood in the doorway of the room where I'd learned to read and watched the man who had taught me everything about building things quietly dismantle the one space in that house that had ever been mine. You're really doing this, I said. You've always landed on your feet, he said, without stopping. My mother echoed him from the living room like punctuation, like that settled it. I looked at the box on the coffee table. On top of a stack of folded shirts sat a small cedar sewing tin my grandmother had given me when I was 12. I picked it up and held it. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and felt the cold weight of a key ring I had never mentioned to anyone in that house. I didn't mention it now. You're not throwing me out, I said quietly. I'm choosing the door. Father looked at me. For just a moment, something flickered across his face, recognition or regret or both. Then my mother called from the other room, "Don't be dramatic, Serena," and he went back to folding. I picked up the box myself. I walked out before anyone could hold the door for me and closed it behind me on my own. I drove 3 hours back to Heron Cove the same night, the box rattling on the back seat. I didn't cry. I was too busy doing math. By the time the highway curved toward salt air and the lights of the harbor came up over the dunes, I had already started building a plan. My apartment sat above a tackle shop 2 blocks from the water. My office, the converted boathouse with my company name on the sign, was a mile down the coast road. This was my actual life, the one my family had never made the drive to see. My business partner, Priya Nair, was still at her desk at 10 o'clock, the way she always was when a contract collapsed and we needed to scramble. She took one look at me carrying that box and put her coffee down. You finally left that house, she said. They left me, I told her. I just stopped arguing about it. Priya had been telling me for over a year to pull back from Millbrook. She'd watched me wire money home, co-sign things I shouldn't have signed, make that 3-hour drive every single weekend without fail. She'd watched me come back quieter each time. "Good," she said simply. "So what do you want to do about it?" I set the box on my desk and looked at it. Under the sewing tin was a folder, one I kept locked in my drawer and carried between my two lives like a secret I hadn't found the right time to tell. Priya saw me look at it. "Is it time?" she asked. I still wasn't sure. But for the first time in 18 months, I felt the rope I'd been holding go slack in my hands. Let me back up, because that box didn't come out of nowhere. When Gerald collapsed in the driveway 14 months earlier, I drove to Millbrook and didn't come home. Somebody had to manage the house during his recovery. My mother hadn't held a job in 20 years. Vanessa was between positions, which in her case was a permanent condition. So I moved into my old room and took the weight. I caught up 3 years of property taxes that had quietly fallen behind. I covered the gap in the homeowner's insurance when the policy lapsed. And when Vanessa wanted a newer car and couldn't qualify on her own credit, my mother placed a pen in my hand and asked me to co-sign, because a default would damage the credit I needed to run my business. I set one condition that day: 6 months, and Vanessa takes over the payments herself. My mother waved it off. She's getting on her feet. She never got on her feet, because nobody in that house ever let her hit the ground, and I was always the one standing below it, holding everything up. I told myself it was temporary. I drove that highway every Friday and told myself that family was worth it. I believed that right up until the night they handed me a box and told me my sister needed my room. People who hear this story always ask the same question: why did your mother love your sister more? But it isn't that simple, and I won't pretend it is. Between Vanessa and me, my mother had lost 2 pregnancies. She doesn't talk about it, but my grandmother told me once, years ago. 2 babies who didn't make it, and then Vanessa arrived early and fragile, fighting for every breath in the NICU. My mother looked at that tiny girl and made a silent, permanent decision. This child will never want for anything as long as I live. I understand where it came from. Grief makes people do things that look like love but function like damage. What she never decided or never noticed was that I was also there, present and capable and quietly becoming invisible, because capable people don't require attention the way fragile ones do. I was the strong one, which in that house was just another way of saying I was the one nobody had to think about. My father, Gerald, had learned long ago that peace meant agreeing with whoever raised their voice. In our house, that was always my mother. So he kept his head down, went along, and never once stood between me and the weight they gave me to carry. The only person who had ever seen me clearly was my grandmother, Nana Greta. She used to pull me aside when I was small and say, "You were never the strong one to me, baby. You were just the only one who showed up." She lived in the back room of the Millbrook house now, turning 80 next month. Her world had shrunk down to a recliner, a window, and a bird feeder she could just barely see from where she sat. She'd lost the one place she ever loved, a small house on the water, an hour up the coast. Years ago, when the hard times came, and losing it had folded something in her that never quite opened back up. I think that's why I kept making that drive for so long. Not for my mother. For the woman in the back room who still remembered my name when nobody else thought to use it. That first night back in Heron Cove, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with cold coffee and a laptop, and I started pulling threads. First, the auto pay I'd been running for the Millbrook property taxes and homeowners insurance, both drawing quietly from my account every month without a word of thanks. Both stopped with 2 clicks. Then Vanessa's car. I'd been quietly covering those payments while she paid the minimum every few months to look like she was trying. I canceled the auto pay and sent her a message in plain language. The payments are yours now. I'm no longer covering them. I knew I couldn't simply disappear from the cosign. That's not how it works legally. If she defaulted, it would affect my credit too. I made peace with that. One bruise to buy 15 years of freedom seemed like a reasonable trade. Then I made a list of every standing expense I'd been quietly carrying for that house, and I drew a line through each one. It took about an hour. When I was done, the entire quiet machine I'd been running for the Millbrook household had stopped. They'd packed me out at sunset. By midnight, the floor under them had started to shift, and they didn't know it yet. I wasn't doing it to punish anyone. I was doing it because a wall can't hold up a room it's no longer standing inside. I opened the locked folder I'd carried back from Millbrook. Inside was a deed, 3 years old, bearing my name, for a small house on a strip of beach 40 minutes up the coast from Heron Cove. I traced the address with my finger the way you touch an old photograph. Then I closed the folder and went to bed. 3 years earlier, I'd been browsing county auction listings the way I sometimes do on slow afternoons, looking for restoration candidates. When I saw it, a property description I recognized from a story my grandmother had told me so many times I could recite it by heart. A house built in the early 50s. A porch that faced the water. I'd visited the stretch of coast once as a teenager. Following directions Nana Greta had drawn from memory on a paper napkin. The house was a wreck. The porch sagged into the sand. The foundation had shifted. Salt damage had eaten through every exterior surface. 3 subsequent owners had done only surface work, paint, cheap fixtures, cosmetic patches, but not one of them had ever touched the bones of the place. It was exactly the kind of ruin I knew how to bring back. I emptied my savings and bought it at auction. I told no one, not Vanessa, not my mother, not my father, not even Priya at first. For 3 years I'd been restoring it on weekends. The weekends my family thought I was at job sites. New joists, new siding, new roof, 1 full season on the foundation. The following spring, the walls. By the 3rd year, I was finally reaching the interior, the original structure. Untouched since the couple who built it had walked out the door for the last time. That was where I found the tin. The day after I sat with Nana Greta in the back room, after she told me again about the porch, about watching the sun set over the water. This is mine. Nobody can take this. I drove up the coast to work, because tearing out rot is the only thing that quiets my mind when everything else is loud. I was prying loose a sealed wall section beside the old chimney. Lath and horsehair plaster that hadn't moved in 70 years when something dropped from inside the cavity and hit the subfloor with a hollow rattle. A coffee tin, rusted at the seams, the kind they don't make anymore. I sat down right there on the bare subfloor and opened it. Inside, photographs, curled and yellowed with age. A young woman I recognized in the shape of her cheekbones. A man with his arm around her, both of them squinting into bright sunlight, the porch, new and white, behind them. And beneath the photographs, a sheet of paper folded into a small, hard square, gone soft from decades inside the wall. Her handwriting, a list, things I want before I go. I read it slowly. Most of it was simple and private. See certain people again. Make peace with old hurts. And at the top, underlined twice so hard, the pen had nearly torn through the page. Watch one more sunset from the porch of a house that is mine. She had sealed that tin inside the wall the year they built the place. Before the hard years came, before the foreclosure, before every owner who followed, not one of whom had ever gone down to the bones of the house. Until me. I sat on that subfloor until the light went orange through the salt-streaked window. Then I folded the list back into the tin, and I knew, with the kind of certainty I usually only feel when a structural repair has finally come together, exactly what I was going to do, and exactly where. Before I could plan anything, my cousin Marcus called again. His voice was tight. "I found out what the bank letter's about," he said. "You're not going to like it." 2 years earlier, it turned out, my mother had opened a home equity line of credit against the Millbrook house. The money had funded Vanessa, her expenses, Danny's truck, the business idea that never became a business, the wedding they kept announcing and never scheduling. And because my mother's own credit was thin, she had used the strongest name connected to that house. Mine. She'd kept copies from the car cosign, my signature, my social security number, my income documentation. She had used them to put my name on a loan application I never saw, never approved, and never signed. The line was now delinquent. The house was the collateral. And according to the bank, I was a borrower. I'd even seen a sign of it a year earlier. A strange letter had arrived at the Millbrook house, addressed to me from a lender I didn't recognize. I'd asked my mother. "Junk mail," she said. "A pre-approval. Ignore it." I'd tried calling the number anyway, got a runaround. Tried to have my name removed from whatever account it referenced. Was told the primary account holder would need to come in and sign. My mother never went. I'd seen the smoke and reached for the alarm and found the door locked from a side I couldn't reach. Now I understood exactly what I'd been looking at. I called my attorney the next morning. We pulled the loan documents. We set the forged signature beside my actual one, and the difference was plain. We cross-referenced the application dates against records of where I'd actually been. Then we did the slow, unglamorous, necessary work. A fraud dispute to the lender, an identity theft affidavit, and a police report in the county where the application had been filed. My attorney was direct. "This is a strong fraud claim, but the bank has to open an investigation, and that takes time. What we're doing is establishing that you're not liable. If the forgery holds, you come off it entirely, and the bank goes after the people who actually authorized it." A year ago, I'd have flinched. I'd have quietly absorbed the debt rather than put my mother's name in writing on a fraud claim, the way I'd absorbed everything else for 15 years. Not this time. "File all of it," I said. My mother would receive a very different kind of letter soon, one notifying her that the account was under fraud investigation, and that the daughter she'd packed into a box was no longer silently underwriting her choices. I didn't gloat about it. I filed the documents and slept fine. There's a particular peace in doing the right thing for once instead of the convenient thing. Then I made my move on the party. I called my attorney from the restored porch, sitting on boards I'd laid with my own hands, the ocean going dark in front of me. "I want to set up a life estate," I said. "My grandmother. She lives in this house for the rest of her life. No rent, no conditions. I keep ownership, but the right to live here is hers until she's gone." My attorney walked me through it. Clean, legal, airtight. No one could argue me out of it. I'd bought this house with a decade of grinding. No one had given it to me. And now, I was going to give the best of it to the one person who had ever given me anything. I'd throw Nana Greta her 80th birthday on this porch, in the house she'd lost and never known she'd gotten back. Priya thought I'd gone off the deep end. "You're throwing a party for the people who threw you out." "I'm throwing a party for my grandmother," I said. "They're just going to be present for it." My phone buzzed while we talked. A new inquiry had come through the Coastline Restoration website, through the listing where I rented the cottage for private events when it sat empty between seasons. Someone wanted to book it for a family gathering. I almost didn't read the name. When I did, I had to read it twice. The booking request was from a Margaret Holt, my mother. She'd gone looking online for a nice venue, somewhere that would photograph well in front of the cousins and the church friends, somewhere with water views and a proper porch. And the algorithm had handed her my cottage, her mother's lost house, restored to life by the daughter she'd sent away with a cardboard box. She had no idea it was mine. The listing photos showed the finished restoration, nothing like the ruin the family remembered. Priya read the screen over my shoulder and let out a long, low breath. "She's trying to rent your house," she said, "to throw a party you were already planning." "In the house her mother lost," I said, "that she doesn't know I own." We sat with that for a full minute. I had Priya respond from the Coastline business account, company name only, my name nowhere in it. The cottage was available for her date. An event coordinator would handle the details. My mother, delighted with the find, paid the deposit without a second glance. She never asked who owned the property. People like my mother don't ask who's holding the thing up. They just enjoy standing on it. The consequences I'd set in motion started landing in Millbrook that same week, and Marcus kept me updated, whether I asked or not. The car went first. A recovery truck arrived on a Tuesday afternoon and reversed into the driveway, while Vanessa stood in the doorway in her robe, arguing with a man holding a clipboard who had clearly heard worse. 2 months of missed payments, and no one left quietly covering them. She had to ride with my mother everywhere now, like a teenager, and she hated every second of it. Then the bank letters started arriving in earnest. The fraud investigation was open. My mother was receiving calls she couldn't answer and questions she couldn't deflect. The account was delinquent. The bank wanted payment they didn't have. She called Marcus in tears about what I had done to them. Marcus told her, gently and directly, that I hadn't taken out that loan. She hung up on him. Danny started spending less time at the house. The wedding talk went quiet. Men like Danny tend to develop urgent business elsewhere when the money runs dry. I watched it unfold from 3 hours away and felt something I'd have struggled to name. Not joy, exactly. More like watching a structure you'd warned everyone about finally settle the way you'd said it would. I hadn't pushed it over. I'd simply stopped standing where the wall used to be. "You doing okay with all this?" Marcus asked me one evening. "I'm fine," I started. And then I stopped myself, because fine had been used against me my entire life. Proof that I didn't need help. Proof that I didn't need catching. "Actually," I said, "I'm better than fine." For the first time in a long time, the thing falling apart isn't me. Marcus laughed low. Save me a seat at the party, he said. Front row, I told him. You earned it. My father called the week before the party. Gerald almost never calls. There was a long silence after I picked up, the kind he uses to fill a room when he doesn't have words ready. Then, Serena, that night wasn't right. The box, I shouldn't have done that. I waited. I'd been waiting 18 months for him to say something true without my mother in the room, and I wasn't going to rush it. She said it was best for everyone, he went on. I went along. I always go along. That's the thing about me, I suppose. It is the thing about you, Dad, I said. Not cruel, just honest. He breathed out slowly. There's a letter about the loan. Your mother won't tell me what's in it. Ask her, Dad. It's her loan. She says your name is on it. It is. She put it there without asking me. The silence lasted long enough that I wasn't sure he was still there. I didn't know, he said finally. I believe you, I told him. You never know anything in that house. You make sure of it. A hard thing to say to your own father. But he had earned the hearing of it. Are you coming to your grandmother's birthday? He asked. I'm coming, I said. More than you know. I hung up and went back to sanding the porch rail. And I let myself hope, just a little, that a man who had spent his life keeping his head down might, just once, choose to stand up straight. The last week before the party, I more or less lived at the cottage. I finished the porch rail. I washed the windows until the salt haze was gone and the glass caught the light clean. Priya strung lights along the eave line. The caterer confirmed. A bakery in Heron Cove made the cake, lemon, because that had always been Nana Greta's favorite, and I hung a small carved cedar sign by the front door. Her name, in my handwriting, cut into wood and sanded smooth, Greta's Porch. I kept it covered with a cloth until the morning of the party. Inside, on the fireplace mantel, I set the old photographs from the tin, propped against the cedar box. The list stayed folded inside where she had left it. I wanted her to find it herself. The deed sat in a folder in my truck, the life estate drawn up clean, witnessed, her full name typed across the top. Everything was ready. My mother called the morning of the party, and this time the performance had cracks in it. Her voice actually shook. The bank is threatening action on the house, Serena. They say the loan is in default. They say you filed some kind of fraud claim. You have to fix this. You have to help us. I didn't take out that loan, Mom. I did it for your sister, for the family, without asking me, and now you want me to pay for it. We could lose the house. You told me Vanessa needed the house more than I did, I said. So I left it to her. I'm just doing what you asked. Silence. Then the coin she always flipped when she was desperate. You've always landed on your feet, Serena. You can take this. We can't. I let the line sit empty for a moment. I'll see you at the party, Mom, I said. I think you'll find it's really something. She didn't catch the weight in it. She was too frightened and too certain she was the wronged party to hear what was underneath. I finished loading the truck. The cake, the folder, the cloth I'd pull from the sign. I drove the 40 minutes up the coast with the windows down and salt in my hair, steadier than I'd felt in years. Today, the truth got to stand up in a room. The caterers were setting tables on the lawn when I arrived. Priya was adjusting the lights along the eaves. The photographs stood on the mantel. The deed waited in its folder on the passenger seat of my truck. Cars began arriving just after 4. Cousins I hadn't seen in 2 years. Church friends of my mother's. Aunt Rosie from 3 counties over. And then the borrowed wheelchair coming up the gravel path, pushed by my father, with Nana Greta wrapped in a shawl and squinting into the coastal afternoon light. I stood at the top of the porch steps and watched her face. She was looking at the cottage the way you look at a word you can't quite remember, something familiar tugging at the edges, something the mind is almost afraid to name. Then the porch came into full view, the white rail, the clean windows catching the late sun, the string of lights, still dark, waiting for evening, and she stopped. Her hand came up slowly to her mouth. "Gerald," she whispered to my father. "Gerald, this is my house." She couldn't say anything else after that. The cousins kept moving past her toward the food, not understanding. But my father had gone completely still. He had grown up visiting this porch as a boy. He knew it. He looked at the house, and then slowly he looked at me, standing at the top of the steps. Something crossed his face that I'd never seen there before. My mother swept up the path in her good dress, already performing for the guests, already the hostess who had made all this possible. "Isn't it lovely, Mama?" she called out, loud enough to carry across the lawn. "I found it for you. I wanted you to have somewhere beautiful for your birthday." Nana Greta wasn't listening to her. She was staring at the sign by the front door. The cloth had fallen away. Greta's porch, her name in cedar, weathered to look like it had always been there. "Who did this?" she whispered. "Who brought my house back?" The party noise continued around her, cousins laughing, ice clinking, the caterer calling something about napkins. But in that small circle of porch, 3 people had gone still. My grandmother with her hand over her mouth, my father, pale and unmoving, and my mother beginning to sense, for the first time, that the room she was standing in and the script in her head were not the same place. "Mama," my mother said, uncertain now, "I rented it for you." And that was the moment. I came down the steps. My mother rallied. She turned to the cousins gathering on the lawn, to the church friends, to Aunt Rosie and the whole crowd, and she raised her voice into the role she loved most, the generous one, the one who provided, the one who made things happen. "I wanted Mama's 80th to be somewhere special," she announced, warming to the audience. "So I found this gorgeous place right on the water. Wasn't easy, let me tell you, but nothing's too good for my mother." A few people clapped. Vanessa, near the drinks table with Danny, smiled like some of the credit was hers. My mother was glowing now. The morning's fear buried under the warmth of an audience. This was her medicine, to be seen as the woman who arranged, who gave, who made beauty happen. The same woman who told me my sister needed a house more than I did was now taking a bow in a house she didn't know I owned. 3 months of planning, she continued. I just wanted somewhere that felt like family. Nana Greta was still staring at the sign. Marcus caught my eye from across the lawn and gave the smallest nod. A man bracing for a wave he could see coming. I let my mother have the moment. Let it grow. Let her gather the whole crowd into her story. Let her stand at the very center of it, certain she'd won, certain she was the hero of her own mother's birthday. Then, when she paused for the admiration to settle, I stepped into the middle of the lawn. "Mom," I said, in a voice that didn't need to be loud, "you didn't rent this house." The lawn went quiet the way a beach goes quiet when the water pulls all the way back before a wave. My mother turned to me, the smile still on her face, but losing its grip at the corners. "What do you mean, I paid the deposit?" The company is mine," I said. "Coastline Restoration, the one you booked through. The one you paid the deposit to, that's my company, Mom. I let that land. And this is my house." Nobody moved. "I bought this property 3 years ago at a county auction," I said, steady, letting each fact settle on its own weight without rushing any of it. It was a ruin. The porch was rotted into the sand. I emptied my savings, and I've been rebuilding it with my own hands every weekend since. On the weekends, you all thought I was at job sites. My mother's mouth opened and closed. "You work construction," she said, as if that were a rebuttal. "I own a restoration company," I said. "I've owned it for years. You never asked. None of you ever asked what I actually did, because you only ever needed to know what I could do for you." And then she did what she always does when the ground moves under her. She exploded. "You bought our family's house and you hid it from us." Her voice cracked across the lawn, the performance completely gone now, something raw and unguarded underneath. "You let me make a fool of myself. After everything we've done, after we took you in, after we raised you, this is your revenge." The cousins watched her come apart. Aunt Rosie looked at her shoes. Mrs. Rowe, who had apparently made the drive, set down her plate. I didn't raise my voice. "It's not revenge, Mom," I said quietly. "It's the truth, and it's about time it got to stand in a room you couldn't talk it out of." I walked to my grandmother's chair and crouched down to her level. The whole lawn was watching. "Nana," I said. I opened the folder, the deed, her name typed clean across the life estate document. I placed it in her hands. "I brought your house back, and I'm not just giving it to you for today." I kept my voice steady. "This says you live here for the rest of your life. No rent, no conditions. The sunset off that porch is yours, the way you wrote it down. The way you sealed it in a tin inside this wall 50 years ago, before the hard years came." I set the old tin gently on her lap beside the deed. She looked at it. Then she looked at the deed again. Her hands began to tremble. She pressed the paper to her chest and made a sound I had never heard her make in 80 years, half a laugh and half a sob. And she said it quietly, like she needed to hear it out loud to believe it. "My house, my own house." Behind me, my mother found her voice. "You can't just, we're family. That house should be." She couldn't finish the sentence. The entitlement so naked it embarrassed the cousins standing close enough to hear it. She tried the old coin one final time, her voice cracking. "You've always landed on your feet, Serena. You can handle this." "We can't." I stood and looked at her, and I let her see clearly, without anger, without cruelty, without any of the tears I'd carried for years, that the coin didn't work anymore. "I did land on my feet," I said. "Right here on the porch you packed me away from. You told me my sister needed a house more than I did. You were right about one thing, you just had the wrong house and the wrong person." My mother's mouth worked. Nothing came out. And then my grandmother, in her chair, with the deed pressed to her chest, lifted her head and looked at her daughter. In a voice thin as paper but perfectly clear, "Carol, hush. The girl gave me my porch back. Let her have her say." For the first time in my life, my mother had nothing. The whole carefully built facade came down right there on the lawn, in front of every person she had wanted to impress. Aunt Rosie asked too loudly about the loan on the Millbrook house, and my mother flinched like she'd been slapped, because the family grapevine had apparently carried that too. The cousins murmured to each other. Vanessa, sensing the wind change, tried to pivot. "This is so unfair. You're embarrassing us at Nana's party." "I'm not embarrassing anyone," I said. "I'm telling the truth at one. There's a difference. You'd be surprised how often those two get confused in this family." Danny had already drifted toward the parking area, suddenly very interested in his phone. The way men like Danny tend to do when the free ride runs out. And then my father moved. Gerald, who had spent 60 years keeping his head down and going along with whatever kept the peace, who had folded shirts when he was told to, and looked away at every moment that required him to be a father, walked past my mother. He walked to my grandmother's chair. He placed his hand on her shoulder. And he looked at me and said, in a voice rough and quiet and entirely his own, "She's right. Serena is right about all of it." My mother turned to him like he'd betrayed her at the foot of an altar. He didn't look away. He didn't fold. "Margaret," he said, just her name, just enough. The first time in my life I had ever heard him say it. The party dissolved more than it ended. Cousins drifted toward the cake, unsure where to look. Aunt Rosie pulled my mother aside with the pointed questions of a woman who had always suspected something. Marcus sat with me on the porch steps for a while without saying much, which from him was everything. Vanessa left with Danny, came back 10 minutes later because he'd driven away without her. She sat on the steps quietly for a long while, watching the water. Before she left with my parents, she said 4 words she'd never once said to me before. I didn't know about the loan. It wasn't much. It wasn't an apology. But it was the first true thing she'd said to me in years, and I received it for what it was. My parents drove back to Millbrook to face the house on their own, their names, their choices, their debt. The fraud investigation would grind on for months, as these things do. Nothing about it was guaranteed or fast or clean. But I had stopped carrying it. Whatever they'd actually signed for, they would answer for themselves. I stayed behind, with Nonna Greta. When the last car rolled out of the gravel drive and the dust settled and the lawn went quiet, I wheeled her chair to the very edge of the porch. The caterers had gone. The lights came on as the sky shifted gold, then amber, then the slow, deep rose of a coastal sunset spreading across the whole bay. She held the deed in her lap the entire time. "First sunset that's all mine," she said softly. "Took 80 years. It's yours now," I told her. "Every one of them from here on." She reached over and found my hand. We watched the light go down together, the water going dark and still in front of us. And neither of us said anything else because nothing else needed saying. Nonna Greta moved into the cottage that fall. I drove up most weekends, the way I used to drive to Millbrook, except now the highway led towards someone who was glad to see me instead of someone who needed something from me. Coastline restoration recovered. 2 new contracts by October. The hole the resort contract had left filled in, board by board, the way holes always do when you keep working and don't stop. My mother and I didn't speak for a long time. I didn't slam any doors. I just stopped holding them open with my back. My father called sometimes, short, careful calls. Once he drove out to the coast alone, unannounced, and sat on the porch with Nonna and me for 2 hours without saying very much. From him, that was a whole speech. People still ask me if I feel guilty. I tell them what I finally understand. Family isn't a bill you owe forever. It's a door. And I spent 15 years holding it open for people who only knocked when they wanted something. The ones who knock because they love you, you'll always let them in. The rest can learn to carry their own roof. I spent 15 years being the wall. It turns out I make a much better porch. And if this story reminded you that your kindness isn't a debt, that you are allowed to decide who gets the key, then take that with you. Write it somewhere you'll find it again. Come back to it when the drive feels long and the gratitude feels one-sided, and someone has already opened the box before you walked through the door. Give yourself the key first. Everything else gets built from there. If this story sat with you, Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below. I read everyone. And subscribe, because the next story is already waiting, and I promise it's worth the stay.